I'm Kat Walker. I am the president of the Seattle Public Library Foundation Board, and I'd like to say welcome everyone. We're delighted to have you joining us tonight, and we hope you learn a lot about the Seattle Public Library and about the Seattle Public Library Foundation. I'm Kat Walker. I am the president before we start of the talking Seattle about the library, Public Library Foundation and the work we've done this year, I'd like to talk about the land that the Seattle Public Library resides on. The Seattle Public Library is on Indigenous land. These are the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people. As our board continues to strengthen our practices around equity, diversity, and inclusion, it's important for us to include this acknowledgement and to resist the erasure of Indigenous histories. So thanks for giving me that moment. Most of you, I'm pretty sure, received the report to donors in the mail in the last month. And I really hope you had an opportunity to take a look at it and read it, because it highlights what the donors have helped the library to accomplish despite this past year and the obstacles that we faced. The 2020 report tells the story of response, restoration, and revitalization as the library worked to maintain critical services that our community relies on. I'm really proud of the library's incredible efforts to serve our community and the Foundation's very quick response, providing an extra $250,000 in emergency funding to ensure the library could adapt to these shifting conditions. Our community of supporters, all of you, made this possible. So on behalf of the board, thank you very much. With that, I'm honored to introduce our CEO of the Seattle Public Library Foundation, Jonna Ward, who will provide the overview of tonight's program. Over to you, Jonna.
Well, Pat, thank you so much. Thank you for your leadership of the board. You're now in your second term as president, and that's a big commitment. So we just say thank you very, very much. And to everyone else out there, welcome. We are grateful to have you here. You are part of our world and make it special. And we have a special program for you designed to really share the news and insights about the Library and Foundation. So think of this as our attempt to try to bring our report to donors to life. And we'll be giving you a sneak peek into some of the things that are happening with the library in the future. So our program is structured where we have some parts to it. First, we're going to introduce you to the librarians, or our new interim chief librarian, Tom Fay. As many of you know, Marcellus Turner, after 10 years, left and went on to a new position. And Tom had worked with MT for 5 years. And so we were fortunate to have Tom take that interim chief role. And he will be in conversation tonight with Kitty Lyle. Kitty is one of our board members, and they'll be talking about the transition point of the library, this moment we're in, as well as his leadership style and vision for the library. Following that presentation, we'll go on where board member Morgan Collins will help shine a light on some really fantastic programming that's designed for older adults. Now, the library's always served people of all ages, especially adults and older ones, but this is some really intentionally focused programming. And even through the pandemic, we've been able to continue it and take it online. And then I'll be returning along with longtime board member Ross Baker, and we'll be talking about the partnership the foundation has had with the library and reflecting on some of the things we've accomplished over the years that we've been working together. And then finally, we are going to field your questions. And you can submit your questions at any point in time. We'll have a live Q&A session. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the Q&A button, and that's where you can type your question. And we will cover as many as we possibly can tonight. So I think it's time to get started. First off, I want to say welcome to board member Kitty Lyle. She serves on the board, and she also sits on our Grants and Programs Committee. Now, the Grants and Programs Committee is part of the oversight group, and they're really board members who have a deep understanding of the roughly $5 million of grants we awarded the library. Now, Kitty had the opportunity to sit and have a virtual conversation with Tom Fay, our interim chief. And with that, I want to say welcome to you, Kitty.
Thank you, Jonna. I'm delighted to be here tonight with you and with all of our guests. As you said, I'm a relatively new member of the Seattle Public Library Foundation Board, and I haven't had a chance to make an acquaintance with Tom. So I'm looking forward to this interview, and I'm looking forward to learning more about our interim chief librarian.
Hey, Kitty, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. And yourself?
Doing great, thank you. I appreciate your time as a new board member. We appreciate everyone who steps up to do this work.
I, as well as the rest of our guests, are very interested in learning more about you and your professional background. So please fill us in.
Sure, glad to. I've been in the Seattle area and at Seattle Public for about 6 years now. My job is the Director of Library Programs and Services. And with that, in my portfolio was all of the branches, the central library, collections, and IT. So quite a bit of the organization that's public facing fell into my portfolio and the vast majority of the staff. So I've had a good opportunity to learn the whole operation here at Seattle Public. Prior to Seattle Public, I spent 32 years in the state of Nevada, working a variety of library jobs.
We're very fortunate to have somebody with your background in this interim role. We're all looking at the way we've responded and adapted to the pandemic and to the very challenging year that we had. Tom, would you be willing to speak to how would you assess the Seattle Public Library response and adaptation to the challenges they faced in the last year?
Well, I think our team, did a great job responding not only early in the pandemic, but as we learned and kind of grew as a team, but also as a community through the pandemic. I think as we started out, we were like everyone else, not knowing, anything about the virus, not knowing anything about how to even put together some of the systems that we needed to put in place to, safeguard both patrons and staff. And so we did spend a lot of time working through that. I know that can be frustrating on the public side of the equation, but it also was for the staff as well, because their primary role in life is to serve the public. But when you think about what we did in a very short period of time, moving the entire organization to virtual, our IT teams did a great job. Staff could be remote. And we did that within about 10 days. And then right after that, we had people producing virtual content, making sure that we were shifting our purchasing of materials from physical to virtual. And then we were already talking about how do we do some of these programs online, massive programs like Global Reading Challenge. All of that was going on at the same time that everybody was really concerned about their own health, their family's health, and of course their colleagues as well. And in that, the city also asked us to step up and help support those most marginalized and in need, or homeless or insecurely housed patrons, to make sure that we had restrooms available in key areas of the city with water, running water. If you think about where libraries were before we closed, 93% of our circulation of physical materials went through self-checkout machines, meaning our patrons did that work. So when you think about that, we had to re-engineer everything to be back to a physical checkout, but also a lot more handling and a lot more running. A good example is our Ballard branch. At one point, was seeing 750 patrons in a 6-hour block of time. And there was so much running. I mean, our staff were keeping account of their steps as they go along. And it was truly an amazing amount of physical work that went into this as well. And it was completely re-engineering what we did and also re-engineering our spaces.
Well, you're talking about a whole different way of distribution and a new kind of partnership. Can you tell our guests this evening what a community partnership is and how they get developed?
Community partnerships can get developed in a number of ways. Sometimes folks come to us, but really what we do is we actually step out into our communities, and that could be our librarians, it could be our program managers who are really focused on equity and community work. We're really starting with a listening model, trying to determine what the partner needs, but also those folks that they are serving, what might they need. So not starting with what the library can offer, because that's going to, a library means something to everyone a little differently. So we want to be very careful and mindful that we're listening and really approaching it from a standpoint of centering new voices and obviously unheard voices. So that's one of the things that we look for in our work and for our partners.
Well, Tom, that's a perfect segue for us to take a moment and learn more about a program that totally embodies the philosophy that you're talking about. My board colleague, Morgan Collins, has spent some time with Nancy Sloat and Karen Mack recently talking about the library older adult program. And I think that our viewers and guests would be very interested in learning more about the specifics of this program. So Morgan, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Kitty, for the really informative conversation. It's been really impressive seeing the library maintain the services that it has and to really stay innovative through the pandemic. I'm really pleased to highlight one of the important programs that the library puts on for us. It started right before the pandemic, and it's programming for adults who are over 50. And this has already been serving thousands of our neighbors online. And so I'm really pleased to introduce Nancy Sloat, who leads the older adults programming at the library, and Karen Mack, who is one of the library's partners on this program at the Greenwood Senior Center. So why don't we learn a little bit more about the work that they're doing? Nancy and Karen, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So Nancy, could you tell us about the origins of the older adult programming and really the need state that we identified for these services?
In terms of the needs, there are a lot of baby boomers out there. There are 10,000 baby boomers a day turning 65, and that's nationally. And so by 2030, all of the baby boomers will be 65, and that's a pretty big cohort. Here in King County, by 2030, it's something like close to 18 to 20% of people will be over 65. Most of those people actually want to age in place. People feel comfortable in their own homes, or culturally it makes sense to, those cultural norms, or financially it makes sense. And so there's so much that the library can do to support that really big cohort of people.
So, Karen, could you tell me a little bit more about how your organization's been partnering with the library to help provide services for this cohort?
The library partnered with us several years ago to offer a program called Book Discussion for people with early stage memory loss. And I partnered with a librarian at our Greenwood branch, which is like 2 blocks from our center. And then with Nancy, I partnered, a couple months ago, I think, Nancy, with Nancy and with the older adult colleague of Nancy's at King County. And we offered a program where we talked about memory loss. We talked about the stigma associated to it. We had a really robust question and answer period. And we talked about what people wanted to talk about, what they wanted to ask specifically, what they could find in terms of programs in the community. So working with the library really enables us to widen our outreach. There's no question.
I think strategic partnerships like that are critical. And I think help underline that the library isn't just a place for books, it's a place for community, and it's a place of resources. So Nancy, could you tell us a little bit more about how has the library been evolving its programming really out of necessity over the pandemic to continue working with this community, where they are and with the needs that they have?
I did turn to virtual programming. I know that virtual programming can, in fact, leave out big segments of the community, but at the time, and that was the way that I could reach more people. And I think that one of the things that came out of the pandemic, the increased reporting of loneliness amongst older adults. For older adults, even before the pandemic, that kind of social isolation is a big issue. And then with the pandemic, it clearly became a real mental health and physical health issue. I was particularly interested in reaching those living with memory loss and Alzheimer's, because the social isolation there was even greater and the impacts there were even greater. And in discussions with Karen, I realized that the library could just be a tremendous community resource to get that information out. So that's why I was really delighted to be able to partner with Karen, who brings such experience and expertise in working with a group.
That's great. How did your work change too on being able to help seniors and people over 50 really get connected? If you aren't exposed to technology all throughout your life, to start getting connected in these increasingly digital and complex ways.
Yeah.
What sort of approaches were you able to take to increase your connectivity or the connectivity of the community?
The library did a really difficult job through its phone reference, trying to connect people in and explain how to get connected in, and how to use in general the library's digital resources. But I also know that community partners like the Greenwood Senior Center, the community centers, social service agency, everybody jumped in to try to work with their membership or work with their clients to either get them equipment or get them internet. Of course, we have hotspots here at the library hundreds of them that we circulate. So that was a great service of ours. I think it's a good lesson for all of us about how much we rely on technology.
What's in store for the library as in-person services start to open back up?
And I have a very exciting series that I'm putting together, and it has to do with aging in place. And the focus is actually on housing, and offering people information and bringing in some experts on sort of different housing models where you don't necessarily have to live by yourself in your own home. I'm going to do a program on virtual villages, and then there's a whole nother movement called home sharing, which is sort of like roommates. This is designed so that you're bringing people together who actually want to live together and interact with one another. And then kind of related to that is, how can you make your house safe for you to be in? How can you sort of look at those elements of universal design and say, what can I do that's quick and easy and is going to make things safe in my house? I hope that series will kind of really talk to some of the things that people are thinking about in their 50s, about retirement and where do I want to live. So I think people have really become, especially with the pandemic and all of the illness and deaths in the long-term care facilities, people are really looking even more so now at staying in their own homes.
So really, thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Karen. It's been really fantastic to learn more about the program. I feel like truly every time I talk to anyone who works with the library or for the library, I learn a lot more about the program that we do and the impact that it has. And I also want to thank our donors. Their generous gifts have made programming like this possible, and we truly do appreciate it, and we love being able to support programming like this. Now, I'd like to kick it back to Kitty and Tom.
Morgan, Karen, and Nancy, thank you so much for letting us watch this clip and for the work that you did in this interview talking about the library's older adult program. I found watching the clip not only interesting and informative, but very inspiring about what's happened over the last year. I know that you have a very aggressive plan for reopening the branches. And I also know that you have an expression that you use about people being able to reclaim their library.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll start with reclaiming your library. I think one of the things as we started coming out of this that I really wanted our teams to be able to focus on is really moving into the public service mindset fully again. And it really wasn't to say that they hadn't been, but really trying to direct them to what are people going to want when they come back into a space, or maybe just interacting with us in an engagement session with a community partner. And that's a really important piece, because to each individual, a library is something else. If your engagement with us is through a community partner, then that's how you know the library. That's what the library is to you. If you're someone who uses e-audio or e-books, you're like, yeah, this has been good for me, because I was able to get things maybe that I hadn't been able to get before. But if you were someone using physical materials, it was a few months before you could get a physical book from us. And so that was very stressful. We had people, when we opened up just recently to in-building services, where people had access to computers, in tears, because they hadn't been able to use a computer in over a year. For some folks, they had not had any communication with friends or family because they had no access to that computer. And so I think we're reminded each time we hear these stories about what the library means to each person and why it's important for everyone to reclaim what that is. And it could be something just as simple as just space to sit, read, and just have quiet.
I love that. You're asking each of us to customize our own answer to what reclaiming the library means.
I think many of us can say that we've gotten very used to certain things from the pandemic that maybe we don't want to give up, or we're afraid to, re-engage that physical presence. And how do we do that? How do we socialize once again? I think those are some of the bigger challenges out there.
And how do we return the library's role as so vital in neighborhoods and such a community for the people who live in the neighborhoods, and so distinct to the various neighborhoods?
Exactly. And I think that's where you see folks today saying, well, why can't we get our library open immediately? Why isn't it on, the first in the list? And, as we work through this next few weeks and months, by September, our goal is to be ready for the school year. So our goal is to have every single library open. We know that's a challenge because we received a pretty hefty budget reduction in 2021. Nearly $6 million, and that affected 63 staffing positions. But we know we need to be in a better position to support our families, our kids who are going back to school. And really, they were in school, but it was a very, very challenging year. And for a lot of our communities, those furthest from educational justice already, they most certainly had bigger impacts than many folks who had other means to keep their kids engaged and educated. And I think that's where we've got a lot of work still to work with our community partners so that we can do our engagements, but that we're also prepared for families as they come in to re-engage in our physical spaces again. And we want to have the staffing levels at the appropriate level so that we're able to truly assist everyone and get back to business.
Well, Tom, it sounds like you and your staff have met a myriad of challenges since last March when you stepped into this role. And based on that, I have a great amount of confidence that you're going to be able to accomplish this timeline that you have. What are you most excited about in the future of the Seattle Public Library?
Really looking towards that engagement aspect and working with community partners, but not just working, because that just implies a simple partnership, but really looking to work with them and communities and actually collaborate and also co-develop. And that's something that is kind of the next level for us. I think Seattle Public has done a very good job in trying to do equity work, trying to center race in that work. And then the engagement piece, I believe, has been pretty good over the last few years. But if we're going to move to that next level and have that trust and create that trust in community, we've really got to work on the engagement that gets to collaboration, but from collaboration to co-development. So what does a community need, and how can it help actually define and drive what the library delivers? And so trying to grow as an organization where everyone can contribute and do this work and engage with communities and with partners to do these co-creations and co-development, that's going to take time. But I really think that if we can keep our kind of focus on that over the next few years, I think we will actually have a bigger impact in community than we've had before.
One thing you're leaving us with, Tom, is I would guess that after our conversation today, several of our guests are going to be asking themselves, what does regaining my library look like to me? And I imagine there's going to be some very interesting conversations taking place. So thank you so much for giving us that perspective, that language, and that very gentle challenge. It's
Thank you.
a pleasure talking with you today. Well, thanks to a very comprehensive and interesting conversation with Tom, I feel very current with the state of the library. And now I'd like to turn our conversation to the state of the foundation. So I'd like to welcome Ross and Jonna. This is an amazing moment for the foundation, celebrating its 40th anniversary. And I know you two have worked in partnership for the last 20 years. Ross, as a longtime 20-year member of the foundation board and a past president, and Jonna in your role as leader and CEO of the foundation. How does it feel at this moment for the two of you to be sitting here on the 40th anniversary of the foundation?
Who would have thought? First off, the Library Foundation has gone through just a transformation over the years, and we have momentum and growth, and that's thanks to the community. We are so lucky to have this community where we live, that people believe in the library and support it. And in fact, we are so fortunate because we are the largest public library foundation in the country based on assets. And we're so lucky because in turn, that means we can provide the library funding that they can count on, and it's stable and it's predictable. And that's so important for our library.
For the last 20 years in my volunteer work, I've seen the foundation become a partner with the library, which has allowed us to provide new buildings. It's allowed us to expand programs and offerings to underserved populations, as well as throughout the neighborhoods of Seattle. And I think of our library as a jewel for our community, and the foundation is one of the engines that allows the library to be productive and successful. And I can't say enough of the leadership that the library has offered over the last 20 years, as well as the great team that Jonna has put together and worked with, along with our foundation board members for the last 20 years. It's been a wonderful journey.
You're also known as being the visual historian of things happening at the library. You are our storyteller because you are often seen walking around carrying a manual camera, taking pictures of people in action, making contributions. If you look back over your 20 years of service on the board, what are one or two moments that come to mind for you right now?
That's hard to do after 20 years. First of all would be the 10-year anniversary celebration for the Central Library. This event was held on a Saturday evening and allowed us to thank public officials, donors, community leaders, and patrons for the success of the Central Library over 10 years. I think I was most proud of the fact that we had a number of writers from the Seattle community speak and talk about what the library has meant to them and the benefit of the library and its programming to our community. The second event would be when we featured photographs from Edward Curtis, the Seattle resident who went out on a quixotic journey to photograph the tribes and members of all Native American and Native North American tribes over a 40-year period. We had photos that are considered iconic. We had wonderful explanations that were provided by library staff to explain the photographs. And I think most endearing to me were we had presentations from indigenous communities from throughout the Northwest, including Alaska, Canada, the Duwamish Nation, and others, come to speak about reimagining Edward Curtis and speaking about how his work had impacted their communities and how the work of their members now can move forward the communication and knowledge about Indigenous people and their interaction with other communities here in the Pacific Northwest. Lastly, I have to put a third item in there, Kitty, and that's when we worked with the library to present Wi-Fi hotspots in the South at the South Seattle Library, along with an explanation of robotics that was led by a library manager. You should have seen the look on the faces of the students, and I believe, Jonna, they were first and second grade students, knowing that they would be able to take the library home with those Wi-Fi hotspots, and they'd been learning along with some of their other students how to code and use robotics. It's just a wonderful day, and I can't forget the smiles on the faces of the students that were there.
Thank you for choosing those three memories. And Jonna, let me turn to you. Under your leadership, the foundation has thrived, and last year was a particular opportunity to be able to extend the services that our membership in the community so value.
We are so fortunate here in Seattle to have a really supportive community all the way around. One of the things that sticks out to me just in terms of being able to support the library is the foundation has been a bright spot for the library, no matter what we've been through. And I think back, somewhere out there is an amazing donor who is anonymous to us still to this day, who was part or made possible this Make a Million challenge. And I think back to how that just transformed us all. It energized us and it gave us a focus through a really hard time. And I have to say that the library was a great partner through that. And it was pretty extraordinary. So somewhere out there, somebody, you know who you are, made such an amazing thing possible for us.
What a wonderful reminder to us all about the importance of generosity and the impact that we can have. That's an amazing, wonderful story, Jonna. What excites you the most about what you see as the future of a foundation?
I'm excited to see, as we move into our next decade, to see the creative and innovative programming that the library will offer its patrons with the support of the foundation. Over the last 20 years, we've seen growth in equity work, equity programming. We see the Central Library and other branches help homeless readers access services, thanks initially to library foundation funding. And we've also seen the growth in advocacy that the foundation has been able to do on behalf of the library with local leaders, state government, and now nationally, all in an effort to make sure that the library has sufficient resources to serve this growing, hungry Seattle library base. They want more programming. They want more classes for taxpayers, for English as a second language, youth support programs, summer reading program, all the things that this Seattle community hungers and thirsts for. I believe that the library can provide them, but I know that the library needs a strong, well-resourced, energetic, and invigorated foundation and friends to help make those things possible. I'm excited about it. You can probably tell.
I hear that. And it's so wonderful the way you've told the story, that we understand that previous excitement has left this moment. And now what you're giving to us is excitement about the next moment. That was lovely. Thank you, Ross. Jonna?
Right now, the Library Foundation is funding over 40 programs. And they're focused around library work on education, economic opportunities, enrichment. That means so much to all of us, as well as equity. And I think that our opportunity as a foundation is to continue to both fund and support the library, but it's really to be able to advocate on their behalf, as Ross mentioned, And I think the other piece is our effort to help tell the library story. Because you and I, we all are using library maybe in a very traditional way, but there's so much work that the library is doing that's beyond that. And they are bringing services to communities who have special particular areas in need of support. I think the one last thing I would say is even coming through something like the pandemic, it has released this enthusiasm and energy and just commitment to the public for our library staff. And I'm so proud of the work they're doing. I'm excited. I am excited.
Me too.
I hear that. You too, and your 20-year partnership. Earlier with Tom, we talked about community partnership. Partnership and coming together is such a core theme of our whole conversation here. I want to give our guests here an opportunity to have live question and answer sessions with you. So, guests, if you would look at the question and answer feature there on your Zoom, John is going to lead us in a conversation answering the questions as they come in.
I just want to say thank you, Kitty. Thank you, Ross. You are fantastic board members, and we appreciate your work.
Thank you.
All right. How is that for a little switch over? Welcome, everyone, to our live segment of our State of the Librarian Foundation. And you can see we have Tom with us here. And before we jump in, I just want to do a couple things. First off, welcome. We're competing with the Kraken, that draft. I think we probably hear it at my home today as the excitement is going on, but glad you were here with us. And then I also want to do a couple just shout outs that of appreciation. And first is to say thank you to US Bank Private Wealth Management, our board member, Kat Arnold, who's also one of our leaders of the board. US Bank has been so generous for so many years, and just such supporters and believers in what our library does. And, you know, if you put them on that path of a corporate supporter and longevity, they're the top of the list. We also have some guests here today who have done some really incredible gift giving. The Becker Brown family has set up a new endowment. The Silvermans have set up a new endowment. And the Loeb family has joined us as active donors to our support. And then the one other person I want to do a shout out to thank for his support had a little cameo. And that was our Emeritus Board former president, Lynn Mao, who's just a very incredibly generous supporter. And she was in the video with the picture from the 10-year anniversary when she gave remarks. So a little bit of memory lane today. And I just want to say thanks to all of our supporters out there. Tom, okay, you've been busy. I've got a few questions to get us started, but any of you feel free to add a question in the Q&A and we will work our best to get through them and then be wrapped up by 6 o'clock. So Tom, talk about what's happening with the branches since we recorded this and how are the openings going?
Well, we're moving through them. We're excited now that we will, as of August 4th, be at 23 of 27 locations. I saw someone had a question about Fremont in the Q&A section, and yes, Fremont will be opening on August 4th. We're adding another day of service at Queen Anne, Sundays, starting August 1st. So that's another good sign. We're able to get some staff back in place because we recently shut down the restroom operations, which we had been running for 15 months in support of the city's needs around making sure folks had adequate areas for restrooms and for hygiene, just be able to wash up and everything else. So all in all, I think we're moving in a positive direction there. We have 4 more locations that we'll be bringing on as we hire some of these staff back over the next few weeks and months. And again, as I said, we'll be ready to go by September with all the locations. Some of them have some challenges. They're not our buildings, so we have to work with landlords and all of that to work to opening.
Well, so I know it's not public yet, but the foundation helped pay for some really special Amazon-like lockers.
Yes.
And I don't want to put you in the spot, but tell us a little more about those lockers and where they'll be and what kind of experience a donor can experience.
So the lockers are pretty cool. I think they're going to really be a good trial for us here, and hopefully next week. We've had a few slowdowns in things getting delivered and everything, but next week we hope to be able to have those fully installed and implemented, and that will be at Rainier Beach and at High Point. Those are our first two locations. That'll allow folks to choose the lockers as basically as a branch for Holds pickup. And that means you can pick things up 24/7. There will be 90 lockers, or not spaces, I should say, 90 spaces within that system that we can put material. So we're really excited about this, offering another delivery method for folks, and really hopeful to see, how, not hopeful, but anticipate that this will be used by a lot of families that often are working past our hours, our open hours, and hopefully be able to have more access to materials in these communities. And then if successful, we hope to be able to bring on some additional units over time as well.
It's just such an example with curbside and the early concierge service and all of that. It just allowed us to experience the library in different ways. And so the self-service piece of it is an interesting thing. You know, we've had a couple questions here coming in related to budget. And one of them had to do with a question, and Tom, feel free to follow these if you are, about using money from physical materials and putting them toward virtual materials. And the question is, will more resources be allocated to physical materials now that the libraries are starting to reopen? Because we do have folks that prefer the actual physical materials.
Oh yes, and I think that's where we will be working. Obviously, we already have been as we continue to provide more and more curbside. We started putting more back into those physical collections, and it's a rebalancing. It's a challenge that our selection and collection teams work on every day, and one of the probably not unforeseen, but most certainly one of the outcomes of having so much switch to digital is that that's also our most expensive product line. That costs more, probably anywhere between 2 to 4 or 5 times as much as you as an individual can buy that material. And so that is a challenge for the library, especially when we had so much of it in the digital realm in 2020. So there is some rebalancing that we have to do. We know that we had even more adopters of digital e-content. So that also will drive expenses probably more towards that category. But we have to make sure that we have the material available in all formats, or as many formats as we can, to make sure everyone has access to the material.
You know, I was just reading one of the staff reports to the trustees about all of the digital cards that were established through this COVID period. And it's an incredible amount of folks signing up for library cards. And now access to library cards is easier than ever, which is a fantastic outcome. One of the questions from Jackie is about pre-COVID. The library brought a lot of authors in to speak about their books. Will this be happening again? The programs are good, but the library, your programs are good, but is the library ordering new books, both fiction and nonfiction? So
yes, and so on the books side of things, yes, we are ordering. They are quickly ordering as much as they can, and we're back in full swing in that regard. As far as the programs, yes, as you probably have already experienced, we've had a variety of virtual programs available with authors. Very well attended, and one of the other benefits, if we're allowed by the author, is that we also can have those available longer for people to view at a later date. And I think as we get into the next few months, when all the buildings are open, we'll be looking at a time that we can bring in-person programming back for folks to participate again. But I still think that we'll have a hybrid. I think one of the things we learned is that not everyone wants to go to Central, for a big program. People want to be able to experience that maybe from home or maybe with friends. A book club getting together and say, hey, let's all get together at our place and have some snacks and enjoy this together and not have to take the trip downtown. So I think we've learned a lot. Our teams have gathered even greater skills in doing these and delivering these. So I think it'll be kind of a mix as we go forward.
Good deal. All right. There's 2 questions that have come in related to budget. And I I just want to see if we can combine them together. One of our guests came a little bit late, but he heard that about the budget cuts that led to the dozens of staff positions that are unfilled and basically closed. But he also comments about the voters passed the levy, right? So how do you guarantee, how are you working through the budget cuts from the general fund and how you balance that with levy funding and where we're at in terms of getting those positions back?
So as we went into 2021, we knew because of the $5.8 million cut that we would have to use some of our resources, one-time levy funds. The board authorized those expenses. That allowed us to keep all keep staff. We had a lot of vacancies that we obviously let those positions go, but the board authorized us to spend that levy funding one time because we were unable to obviously bring on the additional levy hours that we had in the 2019 levy. As we go forward, we know that we received the Seattle Rescue Plan funds, the federal funding, about 1.1 million, and that's what's allowing us to hire staff back now so that we can get back to pre-pandemic operations and hours. The city does know that for us to continue this into 2022, that's about a $3.4 million cost. That is the direct public service or public facing staff that brings back. It won't bring back some of those other staff. So there's, again, there's $2.4 million that also is affecting potential other staffing positions. It affects the materials budget as well, which was about an $800,000 hit to the materials budget. And we know that we're going to be working with the mayor's office over the next few weeks as we finalize the budget. And we will be hoping for the best there. And we know that if need be, there are other advocacy routes that folks will likely pursue.
There you go. Well, for those of us involved in on the Library Foundation side, friends, and certainly donors, there's going to be opportunities we may be calling on you to help us advocate with our city council when the mayor's budget's out and make sure the library gets the hours back, because you have to protect the general fund and not be supplanting that with levy resources. We just can't go there. And in fact, levy resources, speaking of, we've got 3 URM or Carnegie libraries with unreinforced masonry that are going to tee up a project, or 3 big projects for the library that the foundation hopes to also support. Do you want to talk a little bit about those?
Yes, we obviously, the city in general has a lot of unreinforced masonry buildings in its portfolio, and the city itself, residential, everything else, there's a lot of them. And we went through along with the city and identified those that were most critical. And so that's where we are starting. The 3 that we have, Green Lake University and Columbia, in this first round. Green Lake hopefully will be starting next year. We'll hopefully be out to bid later this year or first part of next, and be starting that project. They're not inexpensive projects. They require a lot of structural steel. In many cases, it means we have to peel the building back. Although that's an opportunity. By working with Landmarks and everyone else, we can also put in some more modern improvements. The goal in this, as we kind of stretched it, is how do we do things that make it more relevant and useful for the next 100 years, because that's what we really want to be able to do with this. So can we get additional power? Can we change out old fuel powered mechanical systems with electric, be more eco-friendly? Can we get air conditioning in these so that, some of these issues we had just recently where folks didn't have air conditioning in their home, we are at least another resource for folks to get out of the heat. So there's a lot of things that we can do, and obviously spruce up the building. Those are all good things too, but really trying to put a better infrastructure in for the long haul with these buildings so that they're still relevant 100 years from now.
Speaking of the air conditioning, elevators, we were able to help secure funding for some state funding for Green Lake, but we'll have a pretty big project for the foundation coming up with both university and with Columbia. And by the way, do you when the university's opening? That's one of our questions that came through from Eleanor.
At this point, university should be open. I think it is open.
I tell you, I can't keep track. The hours are flying forward and lots of things are happening. So
I'm going through my mind, and I believe university is open. So yes, I have 4 of them that are not, which are Montlake, Madrona, New Holly, and I'm blanking on the other. There's one other.
Magnolia open?
Magnolia is open.
Yeah, okay. Well, there you go. I can't keep track. I'm thrilled though, because we're getting more and more all the time. But the one question is about the Northeast Library, which is not one of the Carnegies, and but a beloved, heavily used library, but shuts down when it's gotten so hot. Any chance that one could be on the list sometime?
Yeah, I think one of the things we've been trying to do, as we've had discussions both with the city and as we have even had discussions around looking at advocacy for additional state dollars in upcoming legislative cycles, is really trying to identify those locations that we can do that. Northeast is a perfect example of one that could use air conditioning, and if we can find some grant funds to be able to do that, that would be great. Southwest, another very large facility, is another one. It has a air conditioned upstairs in some staff areas and in a meeting room, but the rest of the library not air conditioned, so often closes down, and it's obviously a huge resource in West Seattle. So those are things that we're looking for. I've asked the team to really kind of identify these so that they're not shovel ready per se, but they are ready as projects. We've thought through those. We may even have some preliminary plans or numbers or guesstimates of numbers. Construction's a little crazy right now, but that's how we're trying to pursue this with those locations that don't have it. The URMs, those unreinforced masonry, those older buildings, many of those are going to have to be done with the air conditioning and all these other things as we get to them, because the costs are substantial when we tackle one of those projects.
Well, let's see. This is a totally different question. It's going to be the last one I ask before we wrap up. And this is one near and dear to my heart, because it's what programs are most in need of increased funding?
Oh, wow.
I love that question. Thank you.
That is a hard one. I think it's interesting to me that when we look at some of the programs and increased funding, much of what you heard me talk about in the session earlier was that we need to co-create and co-develop with community. And in some of that, we also have to have enough staff to both coordinate, engage, and do this work. So in many cases, I could say, yeah, I'd like to see more for student success for grades 1 through 5. And I've got one person right now doing that work and coordinating that. So one of the things we're looking at is how can we carve out different resources in the library, meaning in some cases that might be reallocation of some staff or some staff's time to better support these efforts. Because until we can do that, in some cases you could give more money and I can't do anything else with it, which is one of the places we were at one point. But I think for us, when I look at it, it's a lot of these student success areas that we're in right now. Early literacy obviously is a big one that anytime we could definitely use additional dollars there. But student success, while we've had some focus on it, it's really only been in the last couple of years that we've had a staff member more dedicated to that. And I think that's one that could use additional resources moving forward for sure. And it could be early student success, or it even could be later student success with teens, because we're trying to look at an entire spectrum of service from birth until older adult and late in life.
Gotcha. No, that's near and dear to us for sure. You do have some really interesting work happening though with young adults around the digital media learning and the development and computer development and tech development and human-centered design work that's happening. It's pretty amazing, and that's some exciting stuff. And for any of you who know or want to know, we've committed about $4.5 million to the library for this current year. If you have any interest in seeing those commitments or would like to hear more about the various things, Brian has put together some really good information, and I'd be happy to share that with you. So keep that in mind if you want to get into the details with us. But I guess I just want to say one last time, thank you to Tom. We appreciate your leadership. We appreciate what you're doing. And also, this video has been fun. We're full of folks. So we've got Nancy who helped. We had Karen, Morgan, Kitty, and Ross. This is a different format for us. And I can't begin to tell you what it takes for the team to pull these things together. And they make it look easy. And we have wonderful support from Trial and Error Productions that makes it possible. So I just want to say last thing to everyone. We're in the middle of summer of learning. It's around intergenerational storytelling, translated in many, many languages and some really targeted work. For you as donors, there's an upcoming program. It's called Estate Planning Seminar. It's about focusing on planning with the social and race justice framework in mind. It's going to be an interesting one. Lorraine Del Prado is leading that, and she is a well-known local leader in estate planning. And so that's going to be August 17th at 10 a.m. And with that, I think I just want to say thanks to the team, thanks to the board, thanks to so many of you donors and supporters and all that you do to make our library just shine. And with that, I want to say thanks for another great year, and we'll be back with the State of the Library for 2021 before you know it. Take care, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye now.